Hey y'all, this is Lena Bell, back with another video, back with a little lesson here for you about quilting in America. Now I can also briefly just talk about quilting in general, but what I'm going to concentrate is quilting in America. Now right here I have two quilts. These are baby quilts is what I call. They're so small. This is for a little boy. That was born recently. It's for a little girl. Well, he likes dogs. That's all we know. That's why I have little puppy blocks. And the top sheet is called the patchwork. So what you're seeing is patchwork. Now, these are actually what you would call scrap quilts. I'm going to get into the history and more specific terms when coming to quilting. But this is the patchwork, and all of these are actually scraps of fabric. This was in this bin of fabric. This was in a bin of fabric that was given to me. This was an old pillowcase. This is denim. This is the only piece I actually did purchase of the puppies. And then in the back, it's not my best work. I'm still learning with a certain machine. Is the boy's name, as well as the girl's name in the back of this one. And these are also, this was a bed sheet, this was a bed sheet, and they've been cleaned properly and then sewn together into patchwork. So I don't know if any of y'all have ever seen a quilt and just admired it for how long, maybe thought like, oh, I wonder how it was made, or if you did know how it was made, like how that must have took them a very long time. Now this is about for anyone that was interested in how this has evolved into the craft that it is today. First off, the word quilting actually defines the stitching together of two layers of fabric between padding, otherwise called batting. In between these, I have a cotton, 100% based cotton batting that actually isn't very lofted, meaning it's not very thick, but you can still feel it. Quilting can be traced back as far as ancient Egypt. In the British Museum, in the British Columbia Museum, in the British Museum in Egypt, there is an ivory carving from the Temple of Osiris at Abydos, founded in 1903, which features the king of the first Egyptian dynasty wearing a cloak or mantle that appears to be quilted. Evidence of quilt work was found in Asia as late BC and early AD years. Quilting became evident in Europe during the 12th century when it was discovered that the Crusaders wore quilted garments under their armor for comfort, warmth, and protection. Evidence of many more quilts were found in Europe throughout time, and many, though described as obviously beautiful works, they were usually made to be used. These may become more what we call heirloom pieces, more to be in display. They can be used as an actual blanket. Absolutely, they've been washed, like these meant to be used. But the quilting in its beauty, I've seen artistry of it that just being hung up on walls. It comes from being used, obviously. One of the earliest decorative quilts made around 1860 is the famous Tristan Quilt. This was made in Sicily. It is one of the oldest surviving quilts in the world. You can find a section of it in the V&A Museum in London, England, and another in the Bulgaria Palace in Florence, Italy. Obviously, quilting as a craft came to America with the early Puritans, with the first people. Most of the first people. Quilts were made in those early days in America to serve a purpose, to provide warmth at night and to cover doors and windows to help reduce the cold. Quilts were functional with little time for women to create very decorative quilts. Oftentimes money and other resources were limited, so quilts were made with what was ever available, often old clothing or no longer needed by family members or other pieces of fabric that were given. So for example, this is like I said, this was a pillowcase piece right here. And a lot of this was just given to me. And then here's a lot of old bed sheets. None of this has old clothes. Actually, this is old clothes, the denim. but it's a softer denim than what, it's more of a fake denim, actually. Worn quilts were patched together or cut apart to make even another usable quilt. Those early quilts tell the history not only of early American quilting, but also the early history of this country in the early 1800s. Whole cloth quilts became very popular. These quilts' beauty was not in the fabric or colors, but in the stitching and or cording together done. A applique became popular in the early to the mid 1700s and peaked in popularity around 1850. But it was only for the wealthy that it could afford the expensive fabrics that went into those early applique quilts. Applique is it. I think of the most decorative quilt you have, or if you've seen. This is not what you would think of applique. And when we're talking about all the stitching, what I've done is stitch in the ditch, which is in the seams. So this isn't a very good example of the best work. Now on the bottom, I'm going to redo it. This is kind of gotten old and washed out. There's quilting inside each block, but it's not. Usually you see, or if you see these beautiful applique quilts, there's just a beautiful design. There's these whole pieces to show off the beauty of the fabric as well, which in this time period is what they were looking for. When the Amish settlers started to populate the farmlands of Pennsylvania and the Midwest, they did not quilt and came with the feather beds that they had used in Europe. Over time, though, they adopted the ways of the earlier settlers around them, developing the distinct Amish quilt style that we know today. Many variations of the quilt were developed during these early times to adapt to the conditions of living in early America. One was the style that we know today as a comforter, where the layers were tied up to keep the layers from shifting, bunching, which is what I'm talking about, like the batting inside, you have the 3 layers stitched together. If you have a comforter at home, that typically you have the 3 layers. Some people, their comforter may be stitched together like this. Mine isn't a very good example, so I cannot show you at this moment, but that is what it is talking about here, and it keeps the warmth inside best than just one layer of cloth. Another was a summer quilt, which was created without the warm middle material, resulting in a lighter quilt for the warmer days. Also today what we use is a flannel fabric inside to create a thinner layer for a lighter feeling. This is batting, and I've also used flannel, but I do not have that quilt for you today. Quilt making was taught to the young daughters in the early days. One story tells of a girl creating a baker's dozen quilt tops for her future days as a wife and a mother. She would piece together 12 everyday quilt tops and one more decorated that would be used for her bridal bed. Once she became engaged, then the quilt top would be completed for her use in her very new home. Likewise, mothers often created multiple quilts for each of the children to take with them when they left home. And this is where the heirloom quilt it comes into play. Families just give their quilts down, or you make a quilt for somebody, like these are for family members of mine. Quilting may well have been a relaxing activity for a pioneer woman, especially when the women of the community or rural area would gather at each other's home for a quilting bee, whether a social event for these early women or the result of gathering of the community for a barn building. These times were often the highlight of these women's challenging lives. These quilting communities still exist today. There actually is one not far from me that I have been to one. I was the youngest one there, other than another woman's granddaughter. It is not as common of a craft with a lot of young women today, especially like a traditional. There are modern ways of quilting, like quilt as you go, where you quilt a big block by block with all 3 layers, and there's different ways to stitch together. With the establishment of slavery also came the development of an even more unique look. The skilled quilters among the slaves often spent their days working on quilts for their owners' households, and then would spend their limited free time creating quilts for their family members or their slave community using any scraps they could find. Often of mismatched fabrics, colors, shapes, these quilts had a unique beauty of their own that told the story of their struggles. And there's an art of quilting that comes from that as well, scrap quilting, having this mismatch that wouldn't seem like it would go together, but when you put it together, it really is beautiful. The art of quilting took a big leap forward in the mid-1800s with the development of the sewing machine. Though the early machines were hand and or foot activated, they eliminated the need to hand stitch a quilt. As time passed, quilts evolved to become more decorative or colorful, often using all new fabrics of similar weight and feel rather than a hodgepodge of reused materials. During World War I, women were urged to make quilts to save the blankets for the men fighting overseas. The Civil War really saw a lot of this. And there are still, I've actually seen them, I've touched them very lightly, there are still quilts surviving from the Civil War era. And one thing about women that would quilt during the Civil War is they were known to have whites in them because they would get dirty and they would show, or if they used in hospitals, that they would maybe be covered in kind of blood or something like that. So they were encouraged to use very dark colors. World War II saw quilting as a way to raise funds for the Red Cross with the creation of signature quilts. The signature quilt was created by selling community store owners and citizens the opportunity to have their name embroidered on a quilt for a very small fee. The completed quilt would be raffled off to some lucky winner, and the proceeds would be used by the Red Cross to support their efforts in the war. And what I like to reflect on is how things have changed and still are changing with this craft to maybe being more modern. Like I'm saying, there is the quilt as you go, which I don't have an example of that right here. That's my next quilt project for my mother, actually, because it's going to be a big one, and I want it to really show this. I worked so hard on this. I love it because I love you. One thing, what I want to reflect on, what innovations are there to come? What are we creating that will become history for our family, for our community, or for our craft? It does make one wonder where this will go from this art form to the history that it all shares. There's just so much that goes into just a singular quilt that some can take 2 weeks at a time. I have patchwork that has taken me, that I've hand sewn. There's many different ways to sew. I can get into that into another lesson. These are machine made with a Husqvarna, I think I'm saying that right, machine. And hand sewing would have took, I would say hand sewn or top patchwork, double piece, and close to finishing it. It took me about 2 months, and I was doing it in my free time, like when I'm sitting around just, and the seams, it was different than just putting 2 pieces, like edge to edge. You would be folding the seam. I could show one day, but machine quilting actually absolutely changed the world with not just quilting, but just clothes in general. Like what I'm wearing today was made with a quilt, with different feet. I'm not quilt. I'm sorry, with a sewing machine and different pieces and different ways you can use a sewing machine with different feet on it. Change different styles and not styles, ways, like bunching up a piece or making a strap. I would love to talk more about quilting or sewing if you are interested. This one took me about 4 days. It is smaller. I can't really show all of it on camera. This one is a lot smaller. This is she's about a year old, and you could actually see that I started to run out of different colors right there and there. But I kind of tried to make it look like they're all touching at the corners, of the same style, and I made a little dress and a little shirt out of the scraps for the child, actually. And then the edging, or the, not ribbing, I just say edging, is different pieces, scrap pieces. The underside is kind of ugly. I know I could have done better. But yeah, this is Stitching in the Ditch. This is a pretty classic patchwork, not very fancy, but incorporates different things. Oh, and these are strawberries. Aren't that cute? Alright, so thank you so much for listening, tuning in. I hope you really enjoyed this lesson. And please, if you have any other interests that you would like discussed, or if anything I could sew for you and display or talk about, I would absolutely love to. So thank you very much for tuning in. Comment, subscribe, like, especially, comment, let me know what you're thinking and how you feel about this. Alright, bye-bye.